In the first episode, we discussed about the Renaissance, the archetype of the Renaissance that becomes an almost redundant presence in Italian design. I want to open this second episode of our conversation with a reflection on the first industrial age. So between the 19th and the 20th century, when design becomes kind of a more self-conscious activity. And we'll talk about the creation of a new canon in coincidence with the formation of Italy as a unified state. The idea of design and the idea of industry as Italy's bid to join the industrialized nations. And we'll talk a little bit about the formation of this oxymoronic idea of industrial art. So a new canon starts with the design of new products. I chose a few here to open up the space of this reflection. One is the Gianduiotto chocolate. It was designed by Pier Paul Caffarel, a Turin-based baker who first joined cocoa and hazelnut in creating what is called gianduia. This gianduia is at the base of a lot of the developments of Turin chocolate art, and we'll see this with the development of Nutella later on in the 20th century. The new canon relates to the Sicilian work of the Florios. The Florios were bankers in Sicily. They owned a foundry. They started the cultivation of Marsala wine in coincidence with the opening of wineries by Englishmen and wanted to kind of replicate the Madeira wine of Portugal. And the Florios were also the ones that invented the technique to can tuna. These complex business, banking, foundry, winery, and tuna canning led them to open a new business in navigation. So the Florios really were the owners, one of the most important lines of ships and boats that were crossing the ocean in coincidence with the Great Immigration. They were behind it. The new canon also relates to the invention, or in this case, perfection of modern items. This is the story of Edoardo Bianchi, who was a mechanic from Milan, who was the inventor of the bicycle with two wheels of equal diameter, so the so-called safety bicycle. I'm sure you're familiar with a previous bicycle. It's called the Granby, like a big wheel and a smaller wheel. That was very fast, but also very unstable. Bianchi brought this idea of the bicycle to perfection with the invention of the safety bicycle, the form of the bicycle. Today, Bianchi is also the founder of a very, very well-known company of bicycles that is still operating today. New canon relates also to the creation of new culinary traditions. So Italy is a patchwork of different regional traditions that are brought together after unification in 1861 by the somewhat artificial creation of what we call Italian cuisine. Italian cuisine is created by a book by Pellegrino Artusi in 1891, The Art of Cooking, The Science in the Kitchen, that kind of creates a repertoire of Italian recipes. In this repertoire, Melegatti, who's a baker from Verona, invents one piece that will become its own tradition, which is the pan d'oro, the golden bread that we now call pandoro. Is like one of the two sweets of Christmas, like with panettone. Another form that takes a new canon is actually fashion. By the turn of the 20th century, fashion is exclusively French and is exclusively an artisanal art. In France, the first tailors like Poiret invents the idea of like serializing forms to create the same dress or the same suit in numerous copies. Until then, fashion is a tailor-made art and a French art. Countering this narrative, a pioneering fashion designer, Rosa Genoni, designed a new dress, which is called the Primavera gown, which is actually based on the dress that Venus has in the Primavera canvas of Botticelli, the famous painting of the humanist age. This introduces the idea that to create a new canon, Italy has to go back to its tradition and find its vital force. So not copy it or imitate it blindly, but find in it its vital force. Now, objects are also bids for modernity. The automobile, this is the first Italian Fiat, which was called Well-Eyes before Fiat, as to give itself English-sounding name or modern-sounding name. Objects were designed as a way to bid for modernity, to show Italy's modernity, to move it forward. Italy uses technology as a way to move forward, and in this case we see the development of Caproni's airplanes. Caproni is, with Wilbur Wright, one of the two founding fathers of aviation. In the case of Caproni, he's the founding father of military aviation. His airplanes that he designed in Cascina Malpensa, Malpensa is now the airport of Milan, are the airplanes that nations involved in World War I, but also the Allies during World War II used to fight. The first aerial bombing of history took place in 1911 in the war that Italy waged against Libya. So those were Caproni airplanes. The bid for modernity is also the design of machinery. So this is first Olivetti typewriter, the M1. And machinery has to do with not just the gears, but the design of an intellectual space, as we see here with Dante, showing that the automated typewriting is worth his imagination, his creative imagination. Camillo Olivetti, the founder of the company that became really an avant-garde of Italian design, started as a young bartender in London, and he learned English there. He got back to Ivrea, his own city in Piedmont, and actually helped his professor in Turin, engineer Galileo Ferraris, to travel to the World's Fair of Chicago in 1893. He accompanied him there, and on the way to Chicago, he stopped in New Jersey, where he met Edison. His professor didn't speak English, but Camillo Olivetti did. And that was a very inspiring moment, so that after the exposition, Olivetti traveled to California, left his professor there, arrived to Stanford and started teaching electrical engineering in Stanford, and started to gather ideas for his company as a mix of engineering and aesthetic solutions. So this is something that he brought back to Ivrea, and that would then inspire, a century later, the work of Steve Jobs. This is the Fiat Zero, which is the first serial automobile produced in Italy. One of its designers is Giovanni Farina, known as Pininfarina, so Little Farina. Pininfarina will become one of the top coach designers in the 20th century. And this is the Lancia Lambda, which is the first car ever with a unified chassis. So this is really a technical development that also combines kind of an aesthetic dimension. Now, in this period, we also develop an idea of industrial art as a paradox of an art that is unique, but at the same time is also industrial, meaning serialized. The first item I want to show you is the poster that Adolfo Hohenstein, illustrator, designed for La Bohème, an opera by Puccini. So this poster is one of the early examples of chromolithography, so the technique where you can put together images and words in the same space. And this image condenses in one snapshot all the atmosphere of the opera, the sounds through the colors that are contrasting the movement, the wind of the characters, and the passions that involve the opera. So how to turn a 3-hour show into a one snapshot, which is what happens with branding, how to turn the life of a company into one image. Photography also becomes an industrial art, so portraiture is a very serialized art. In the work of Mario Nunes Weiss, we see portraiture as something that has a code, but also has an element of uniqueness, as he gives unique expressions to his time's most famous characters. Here we see Puccini, D'Annunzio, and actress Eleonora Duse in the middle. Industrial art also refers to furniture, and this is the case of the pioneering work of Carlo Bugatti, father of Ettore, founder of the automobile company. Carlo Bugatti was a furniture designer, and he was the first one who turned furniture into a piece of art. So this is the famous Cobra chair. So a chair that he turned into a cobra that in a way is a unique piece, but is also a prototype piece that can be eventually serialized or imitated in different copies. So how to create art with the potential of art to be replicated, to be reproducible, which is kind of the canon of industrialism. In a way, this is also the case of the use of iron, a very common material for construction that Alessandro Mazzuccotelli, an ironsmith, transforms into an aesthetic item. So this is the ceiling lamp that he designed for the Camparino bar in Milan, the flagship store of Campari. So the idea of turning a normal or common construction material like iron into a living piece. Cinema as well becomes an industrial art. It's a storytelling form that implies repeatability, reproducibility. It's not a piece of theater that happens differently every night, but it's a matrix, a prototype that can be screened in numerous occasions. The most important movie of this pioneering age of cinema, where Turin was the Hollywood of cinema, was Cabiria. Cabiria is the first movie longer than an hour, was released in 1914, and the signature of Gabriele D'Annunzio, the poet, is what gave this show that was perceived of lesser value because it was repeatable, it gave it its authority, in the same way as we saw with Michelangelo and Cellini during the Renaissance.